Pennsylvania no longer has a Native American reservation. Yet, in Cumberland County, there is a place that holds one of the darkest events in Native American history, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which operated from 1879 to 1918. Today, the site is home to the United States Army Carlisle Barracks. As a child, I remember passing the cemetery of the school where children who died there are buried, not realizing the significance of the place until I was much older. For nearly 4 decades, Native children nationwide were brought here, some by force, others under pressure, separated from their families and languages. Their way of life and culture were deliberately taken from them. These actions left lasting scars. Today, the history of that place is widely known. While the painful chapter marks our past, there is finally hope for healing and a renewed commitment to educate those unfamiliar with this story. This shift from sorrow to action is significant. Building on this hope, their story moves to the present. After years of conversation, reflection, and effort, a new chapter is about to begin. Soon, ground will be broken for the Jim Thorpe Center for the Futures of Native Peoples. A long time coming. This new space will not erase the past. It will give visitors and learners the chance to face difficult truths, learn from them, and move forward with purpose. Please stay tuned as I talk with the executive director of the Jim Thorpe Center about the exciting future plans involving both Native and non-Native people. This is the Wandering Pen Podcast. I'm Christine Musser, your host. Welcome to episode 2 of season 3. Today's episode took place on Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. My guest is Dr. Amanda Cheromiah, Executive Director of the Jim Thorpe Center for the Futures of Native Peoples. Welcome, Dr. Mandy, as I will call you, as you said it was okay, to the Wandering Pen Podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation, learning about you and learning about the Jim Thorpe Center. So let's get started with how you came from New Mexico and ended up in cold Pennsylvania.
Recently I've been thinking a lot about that Punxsutawney groundhog.
Yeah.
It has been quite a adventure this winter season, now coming into spring. And I must say first that the seasons here is like no other. I really do enjoy the 4 seasons here. But by way of introduction, wati se hopa kautiu isaya shashkatana hanusta. So I introduced myself in my native language called CIIS, and I'm from Laguna Pueblo, which is right outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm making a triangle across North America, or a trapezoid of sorts. I spent half my life in New Mexico and then also in Tucson, Arizona. I spent a lot of years there and then made my way up to the University of Alaska in Anchorage and worked there for a couple years, and then now moved here to Pennsylvania. So I am making this trapezoid shape across North America. But I came here, it's very simple. I come here because I believe that my ancestors called me to be here, and that's a very important calling, if you will. important responsibility that I have because I am a granddaughter of Carlisle Indian School students. And so there was 5 of my relatives that I know of so far that went to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which is about a mile from where I'm sitting right now here at the Jim Thorpe Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at Dickinson College. So that's how I made my way here. No offense to those who love this area. There's just a lot of living histories here, and it's very heavy for me personally, but I'm here for a greater purpose, a greater calling, and that's why I'm here in, Carlisle, Penna for right now.
Well, I am so glad you're here, and I'm sorry for the reason you came here because of the history of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. It is a heart pain that is here, and but I'm glad you're here and looking forward to hearing good stuff about the Jim Thorpe Center. But as a born Pennsylvanian, I love it here. I've born and raised in Cumberland counties. I feel that we're the Keystone State, and we have our own great history here, and I'm so glad that you appreciate it, that you find it so intriguing.
Yeah, it's a fine balance of finding joy in Carlisle in this area and then grappling with our living histories, our people.
Exactly, which is what I want you to go ahead and get started with that and with the Jim Thorpe Center and why it is so important to the Indigenous people. I know that's what brought you here, but what is it, the story that you want to tell?
Yeah, so the Carlisle Indian School is a very unique boarding school that was established here in 1879 and closed in 1918. So for a span of 39 years, there was about 7,800 of our native people who were some were brought here, some were stolen, some were prisoners of war, some paid tuition to come here, some were orphaned, and so there's a whole gamut of how our native people got here and representing among 200 tribal nations. So this place, when you think about Cumberland County, think about Carlisle, it's a very unique community in the sense of like, think about within a span of like 30 to 40 miles right down the road is Gettysburg, right? And you think about the ground and the land and what the stories are of this very place beyond the Indian School. And so it's really fascinating to me because in Pennsylvania, there are no state or federally recognized tribes. And so for those who may not know, across the country, there are 575 federally recognized tribes, but Pennsylvania right now has none. And so that puts the center in South Central Pennsylvania in a really, really unique positionality because one, there's no federally state recognized tribes, but also here on the Dickinson campus, there are, let's see, very few Native staff/faculty. There's 3 of us that I know of so far that identify from this community, but then there's also a few more that identify from Indigenous communities abroad. So there's a very few number of us here, and from what I know, there's very few students who identify as Indigenous.
Mhm.
So it brings up the question, well, why does this center exist, given the little presence of our Native peoples? And the answer to that question is that because this Indian school was established, it was very problematic, in my opinion, in the sense that the founder of the Indian school, Richard Henry Pratt, his goal was to culturally eradicate our native people. So his solution to the Indian problem, right? Like our native people have inhabited this land from the beginning of time. And so his solution to, in a sense, instead of killing the native people, is to educate. And to one way was through this off-reservation boarding school. And his what he's known for is this phrase that he coined of kill the Indian and save the man. Essentially, this school was designed to rid of our native people's ways, our language, our cultural regalia, our heritage, child rearing practices. And in this assimilation effort to assimilate our people. So that's very complicated. So if you think about, for those who have grandchildren or children who are young adolescent people, there's a lot of development that happens as a young person, right? And so for our young Native people to come in this place, Carlisle, which is very different than a lot of our tribal nations, it could be very challenging and impact the development of our young people. So when I say complex, it is this complex history, but a lot of strands are tied back to Carlisle. In the healing work that I'm doing here and that we're doing here, I often see it and explain it as a spider web, which comes from some of the literature and indigenous frameworks that I've learned, especially from Dozier Enos. This framework mentality is I extrapolated to the sense of where there's all these living, working strands, right? Like you're a strand, this podcast is a strand, our center is a strand, the archives are a strand. Like think of it as a strand, right?
Right. Mhm.
It's very nonlinear, but we're forming something very beautiful, like a spider web. And so that's how I think about this place because time is fluid and it's so complex in how we're weaving the spider web together.
So what's gonna happen here?
Yeah. So when we think about Carlisle, because it's a significant place of remembrance for a lot of our Native people. Again, remember these strands, that a lot of us are connected to this very place. And I want to emphasize too that there were residential schools before Carlisle, and then there was residential schools after Carlisle. But why does it seem that these strands kind of lead back to this very place? And when our people come here, our Native people, there's the Carlisle Barracks, which has a lot of the original buildings from the old Indian school. It's been up for years and many decades, some of those buildings. And you can actually walk the footprints where our Native people walked and went to school. And even when I use the word school, to me, that's problematic because when you use school, there's a connotation that the learners are there by choice. And that wasn't the case for a lot of our people. But so there's the Carlisle Barracks, and then we have the Cumberland County Historical Society, which I recommend listeners that you go check that place out. You can go in there and look at the original documents from the Carlisle Indian School. Start with the cabinet cards. Start with there's some letters there. There's so many letters. Some letters from like Jim Thorpe. There's so many different elements there. But Cumberland County has a wealth of resources to learn more about the Indian school. And then here, Dickinson College has archives too. And so we help fill a void in this realm here in Carlisle. I call it the Carlisle vortex. In my opinion, is what I call it. But so our center helps fill this void. And I've heard like people have mentioned like there's a lot of Native centers all across this country, that celebrate our Indigenous people and art and so forth. But it really matters that there's one here in Carlisle. So with our new building that's gonna house our Jim Thorpe Center for the Futures of Native People and the Samuel G. Rose Art Gallery, this is gonna be a hub for healing, for teaching, for learning, for building community that's open to everyone. So as our Native people come, as our visitors come from all over the place, this will be a hub for this interaction of love and care and compassion. And so it really matters that we're here. And again, a lot of people have asked me like, why now? Like why now? The Indian school closed in 1918, and it's just, in my opinion, it's thousands of years of prayer and ceremony sown into this very land that's unfolding right now in this very powerful way. So I think this town is really gonna see some transformation in terms of who's coming here because of the beautiful building we're full building, and that's gonna be intact in the next couple of years. So ready to open in the next couple of years.
It breaks ground this after graduation, Dickinson's graduation, right?
Yeah, they're actually starting now. You can see the fencing over there where the new building's gonna be, and then the construction right after commencement, yeah, will be full force.
Mhm. You mentioned Samuel. He's unfamiliar to me and probably our listeners. So
Yeah.
who was he or is he?
Yeah, so Samuel G. Rose, so he is an alumni fan from Dickinson, graduated in the 1950s, and so he is he has a huge heart and is a non-native relative, and his life has been dedicated to amplifying stories, buying art that is native inspired, also native made, and he has really had a passion for the American bison, the buffalo, and really has It's amazing to me because the way he's the generous funder that is donating the money to build this state-of-the-art building. And for those who may not know, John Paul Jones and his architectural firm, along with OZ Collaborative in Philadelphia, but John Paul Jones is one of the lead architects for our building here. And he was also one of the lead architects for the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, DC. So the connection and just Sam's heart to give back is just phenomenal. Has given to Dickinson for many, many years, and this is part of in his words, he had described it as his way of making it right, in terms of one way to make it right, the atrocities that our Native people experience, like this building is just gonna bring so much to our people and beyond. And so Samuel G. Rose is an amazing person. I just love him so much.
Once this is opened, what are you planning there for, like, someone who is not familiar with the industrial school and what happened there? How are you going to educate people like me?
That's a really good question, and I think about how do we engage our relatives, and I use the word relatives very intentionally because it's a term of kinship and it's a term of endearment that I believe is really powerful in this healing work that we're doing. Because while we're grappling with the living histories of the Carlisle Indian School, we also again want to balance that with the Indigenous futures, right? Of this notion of joy and finding joy in Carlisle because our Native people who went to the Indian school, right, there was a whole gamut of experiences that they had. Some were really bad, I think some were positive and everywhere in between. And Jim Thorpe Wathlehook, Moosac Fox and Potawatomi, I believe that he had a very positive experience here in Carlisle. And he also put Carlisle and Pennsylvania on a map in a way that no other person could, right? Like, he brought international fame to this very small community of Carlisle, Penna. And so in this new building, it's trying to figure out and we're still exploring how to do that. Like, I'm a part of a team here at the college figuring out how do we share stories? And Jim Gurenser, who's a college archivist here, he is phenomenal. I recommend you connect with him if you have more questions about, Carlisle and the Indian school. And so I think in this new building, what I envision happening, I've been here since May of 2024, and I've learned a lot about this community in terms of just experiencing it as a Native person, really, a Native woman here. And a lot of times people want to know who I am, what I am, how much of what I am, where I'm from, and why I'm here.
Mhm.
And those are questions I get when I'm just, like, at the local grocery store, or, like, one of the local shops, like and so navigating this place as an Indigenous person, I keep that at the forefront, right, of my mind. So when we create these spaces or these events, I'm thinking about how I balance, like, us not being like a token, or us not being misrepresented, but doing it very thoughtful. So events I imagine are gonna be guest lecturers from national Indigenous people that are gonna come here and share story and share about their expertise. Since the building is gonna have art galleries, also inviting artists, Indigenous artists to engage with our community. I think that's gonna be so exciting. I imagine pretty high profile people coming through this little town of Carlisle, Penna so that all of us can learn and engage together because everything we're doing, is open for the public, right? It's open for the gathering of all of our people, all of our relatives so that we can learn together as we grapple with this living history.
How do you for somebody for kids in either elementary school, K through 12, how do you explain to them when they ask you all these kind of questions?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. One activity that we did with I teach a class called Indigenous Storytelling, and one activity that we did with the young people, and this was to Native youth. What we did was we wrote letters, old school handwritten letters to our youth in Arizona in 2 classrooms. And we were sharing and it wasn't anything magnificent or anything, it was sharing their major, the college students wrote, sharing their major, sharing what it's like to live in Carlisle. We put a bunch of stickers on it and sent it out to the schools. And that to me was a very simple gesture of our non-native relatives, our college students wrote these letters to our native people. And in that sense, like I think just focusing on the celebration of our people because we're always fighting invisibility. We're
Mhm.
always fighting these stereotypes. So with young learners, I think it's important to show one that they're loved, but you interweave that with stories about present day people like former Secretary Deb Haaland, showing them pictures, showing them even you can follow the sports team thread, right? We were talking about this in our class today, looking at the Washington Commanders and why their name was changed, right? Looking at University of Illinois and their stereotypical mascot that they had for many years, right? You can follow the sports thread, that's one way. Fun fact for those who may not know, Jim Thorpe, who Wathohek is his Indian name, and it literally means the lightning that crosses the sky, the light that's made in the sky. That's what his name means. And he was the first president of what we now know as the NFL, right? So that's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people know that story. So you can follow the sports thread, or another thread is you can follow the thread of children's books, right? You're talking about the Dakota Access Pipeline, No DAPL. That was a movement that happened a few years ago. You can look at a book called We Are Water Protectors. That is a great children's book to read and look at. So following the thread of children's literature from our Indigenous authors is also an excellent way to engage. Using YouTube, right? Like today we were talking about the biggest powwow in the world, which is Gathering of the Nation. So I pulled up YouTube videos like this is a gathering of people. And this is the so I use YouTube a lot in my instruction with people. But I think that's a great way to engage the youth and engage and thinking about these bigger conversations about representation, about how do you learn about our people today because we're not antiques, we're not in the past, right? We're right here with you.
My sister actually lived in South Dakota during the Ames. I don't know what you wanna call that. I'm sure white people call it the Ames Revolt there whenever they took over Wounded Knee, and it was Russell Means. My husband and I were in San Francisco, and, this was in 1996, and we were coming back from Alcatraz getting off, and I saw this guy standing there, and I thought, "He looks so familiar." I later on realized it was Russell Means. I was so intrigued and impressed,
Mhm.
and, it was like, I was on a ferry boat with I just thought it was so neat, but what do you think about those kind of movements? Is that something you wanna talk about or you have an opinion on or
Yeah, yeah. I think social movements, I think movements in that emerge from the people are extremely important. And I think in terms of like movement and social change, what I've learned is that, as a woman of color, as a person from historically from a disenfranchised community, like it's challenging sometimes to navigate these spaces. And I often look at our Black African American relatives, who over the years, decades, centuries have moved in these social movements of changing, right, the very makeup and lifestyles of how Americans experience this country, right? And so I think with these social movements, today we were in class, we were talking about the 1970s in the context of so there's a group called Redbone they had a song called Come and Get Your Love. And this emerged in the 1970s. And we're talking about that today. And that song was also used in Gardens of the Galaxy, which is more a contemporary movie now, right?
yeah,
So I think like when I think about the 1970s and these movements, I think about the generational impact of our Native people and other communities of color, really, because there were so many movements in the 60s and 70s. Oh my gosh, like,
right.
we were recently at in DC and exploring and just again being connected to the Museum of American Indian and looking at the civil rights, just that whole era. Like, I think, like, the overall question, what I learned from that and question I ask myself often is, what are you willing to fight for? And is it the time now to fight for that? Because you also have to be very mindful of yourself and what you're capable of doing, especially, like, as a student, like, I'm in higher education, right? And as a student, I often had to figure out how to navigate that as a younger person in education,
Mhm.
right? What are you willing to fight for? Is it the time to fight for, or is it you just kind of wait? Like those are questions you gotta ask yourself. But I think a lot of times here in this work, our non-native relatives, there's a sincere interest to learn more about our native people. And that's what I've learned being here in South Central Pennsylvania is that our non-native relatives really want to learn more. And And I think that it's amazing, I think, when I meet relatives, non-native relatives who are doing their own research to learn more about our people,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that can be through, podcasts like this. We have a podcast called The Indigenous Revolt, which I help host and lead and share stories out of this very Cumberland County, this area here.
Which
Uh,
I wanna say, make sure you tune into that, listeners. There'll be a link in the intro to connect. She's good. She's really a lot better than me. So you can listen to her, but yeah,
yeah.
the
So
Indigenous Revolt.
yeah, so I think that, as a relative, I think it's always harder when you're doing it alone. But finding that collective, finding that community is important to make change. And I'm so for activism and moving in spaces and speaking up, but finding the right balance of when it's your fight or when it's not,
Right.
because you don't want to burn out
I
like that.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it, the one thing the Jim Thorpe Center, you want people to go there once it's opened and once you have it, or maybe you're still designing it and processing exactly what it is, but what is it that they come in there? It's like going into the American Indian Museum. I don't really like calling it it's not a museum.
Yeah.
Washington, DC, it's so much more than that. What When you come out of there, what is it that you want the Jim Thorpe Center to say when people come out, whether
Mm.
they're native or non-native?
Ooh, this is from my own personal belief and leadership and reflection is that when our relatives come, no matter who you are, no matter what background, no matter how you grew up, my hope is that the relatives who come in and when they leave, that they know that they're greatly loved. Like, that is my ultimate hope because I believe that, in this place that has a lot of heartache, that has a lot of trauma that emerged from this very land and place and people, I think a lot of times our native people didn't know that, our young people didn't know that, and to counter that here in this very place in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, my hope is that the learners, right, who come in and experience our community here at Dickinson in our new building, that it counters to know that this is a place where you can learn and that it's safe to learn, that it's a community that they know where they're loved, where they can ask questions, where they can learn and grow and heal. Like, that is my ultimate hope. Because again, my as a relative here in this space in Carlisle, my goal is to do everything opposite that the founder of the Indian school did. Everything opposite. Where creativity was stifled in learning spaces, here I wanna open that up to everybody to co-create learning spaces with me, with us,
Mhm.
right? Where our people's stories were exploited through photography and through
Mm,
magazines, through newspapers. Like, I want to open up this space where we celebrate our people's stories, right? Like in the Indigenous Revolt podcast, like in the stories that we'll share in our new building, right? Everything opposite.
mhm,
That's the goal.
mhm,
And I envision that being that our people, our relatives who come through know that they're greatly loved.
mhm. There's 2 questions I can think of, or 2 statements, questions. And Barb Landis. She was amazing. I mean, she is really what brought the Carlisle Indian Industrial School to the forefront, and she wasn't even planning on it. But so God bless her. Planning Cumberland County Historical Society was planning the 225th anniversary of Cumberland County, and I think this was in 2000. One of the things they did, and you may be aware of this through conversation, but one of the things they did was they wanted a powwow on the Carlisle Fairgrounds. And a lot of natives were opposed to that because of what went on here. So they came to some sort of an agreement that they would do it as long as there would never be another one here.
Hmm.
And they they had private ceremony. I know at the cemetery and I guess different places, and it wasn't something that was publicized. It was the own private ceremony. Jim Thorpe's family attended that, as well as and Scott Momaday spoke, and it was amazing. So, what do you think of that? Is that something, powwows, I've gone to powwows throughout Pennsylvania, what as much as what can be something you find in the Southwest, but so what do you think of something like that happening again?
So powwows are intertribal, intergeneration experience gathering. And I want to mention too that not all of our tribal communities participate in powwow style of dance or ceremony. And but I do believe that there are a lot of our tribal peoples who do participate in powwows. And I believe that the center, the new building that we'll have, will host a powwow of sort. I envision that happening in the years to come for sure. In terms of the Carlisle Barracks, that is such a complicated place. Oh, it's so complicated because, when I first got here to Carlisle, I would visit the barracks often. Like, I would go there to connect, to pray, and as time has moved on, I found that I'm not going as much
Mhm,
because I've learned a lot more, and especially because our center helps with the repatriation ceremonies. For those who may not know, some of our tribal peoples from different tribes from all across the country will come to Carlisle, and in particular, go to the Carlisle Barracks Post Cemetery and bring home the remains of the children who did not make it home. And that is a very heavy process, emotionally and just physically, spiritually. And because I've been here, for coming on 2 years soon in May, that experience really impacts me. And because of what I've learned, what I've seen, I don't go to the barracks as much
mm.
right now. And that might change, but it's when I go there because I know a lot more, I can't right now because it's heavy. It's a it's a powerful experience though when you go to the barracks because you can literally walk in the footsteps of our native people. You can put your hands on the buildings that our native children built, like the Jim Thorpe Gymnasium. Like our children built that.
The powwow was on the Carlisle Fairgrounds, it's
Yeah.
within walking distance, but still, it was just something and being there, seeing dancers there as I experienced it, and knowing what happened there.
Mhm.
Powwows I've done in Arizona or New Mexico, the of the nation the big one.
The Gathering of the Nations is in Albuquerque, so
Oh,
it's next
it's in
month.
Albuquerque, okay.
Yeah, so I'm
I've
actually
been
gonna head down there to Albuquerque because it's the last one under this current leadership and ownership, I guess, so, yeah, I'm going back to Albuquerque to go to the last one.
you participate?
Nah, nah,
Are
I'm just
you
gonna
participate?
go, I'm gonna make TikToks, I'm gonna just engage with
Oh,
the community
you're gonna do that.
and have
Okay.
fun.
My other question is kind of a crawl in my throat, but it is Monchunk, Pennsylvania. Have you been there?
Mhm,
And
I
it's
have.
called Jim Thorpe,
Yep.
and so you know the story of that. So what is your opinion of that?
Oh my goodness, so what the heck, like, I'm amazed that how okay, so to answer this question, so Louis Tiwanima, who is an avid Hopi runner, came here to the Indian School, went to the Olympics with Jim Thorpe. His clan daughter was my faculty advisor at the University of Arizona. And so Tiwanima was essentially, I mean, everybody was in the shadow of Jim Thorpe, honestly. But he traveled with Wathook in different places. They had, when they came back from the Olympics right here on the main roads here, they had a big parade welcoming back the Olympians. And Tiwanima, as well as my family, of course, led me here to Carlisle. But what has happened is that Wathook and his family has opened up in a way I could have never foreseen. And knowing his family now, several members of his family, knowing some of his granddaughters and great-grandchildren, and now great-great-grandchildren, hanging out with them, laughing with them, joking, hearing stories from their family about him, and I just can't believe how Wathook how my journey is connected to Wathook now. And with Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, I go over there often to pay my respect, to process, to pray, to talk to the air, and it's interesting because there, his tomb is just right off the road, one of the roads there, the main roads. And it's a little strange to me there, and I get there's a lot of complication about if he should go home or if he should stay there, like, it's just I what I know I can do is help honor his legacy, honor his family, especially because now our center bears his name, working with the Thorpe estate and all the relatives, like, I wanna make sure that we're doing this, honoring his name in a very responsible way, in a compassionate way, and with Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, I think it's one of the coolest communities I've ever seen here in Pennsylvania.
And going through the prison is pretty, hearing about the Molly Maguires is pretty awesome, I mean, it's sad, but I mean, it's what is
Yeah.
stand on the wall still remains.
It's wild. I don't know. Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania is complicated because you go through the town, you'll see, like, the Jim Thorpe Bank, you'll see his name everywhere,
Huh,
and I don't know, there's a sense of, like, awe. For one, I'm like, "Oh, I want something that has Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania on it," like, I don't know, it's a sense of pride too, but then it's also complicated
well,
because 'cause I'm like, I believe that the family and the tribe, the family for one should have say in whatever happens with Watto Hut, his legacy and journey and so forth. Even after his passing all these years later,
yeah.
he's still larger than life. Like
Oh, he yeah, yeah. He's amazing, and he is a wonderful role model. There was a couple other stars from there, and I can't think of their names, but it's because it's just everything's Jim Thorpe,
mm,
really.
yeah, again, I think about the complexity of this place, because he was in Carlisle when he was a younger man, of course, and being surrounded in that environment, I can only imagine what those young men went through, like because the athletes were very prominent and visible for the Indian school, they definitely had better treatment in terms of food, and some of them got paid, for some of the things they did, like, for the sports, and, like, I don't know, it's so complicated, like,
Yeah.
ah, with this living history.
Yeah, but he's such a good role model for young people because of what he achieved. Would you say his sports is really what got him through day to day, that his focus, his and drove him?
Oh, yeah. I think, for a lot of our Native young men who went there, I think sports was a coping mechanism for navigating, right? They got to travel. A lot of these sports teams that were with the Indian school got to travel and really thrive in a lot of these places that they went and beat teams, like, on the football teams, like, beat these Ivy League teams and
Mhm,
track and field. Like, it's remarkable how our young men really flourished, I think, because it was a coping mechanism for them being away from home or not being connected to their community and culture.
mhm. Now, Dr. Mandy, there's a couple things. One, I want you to give your contact information, how people can reach out to you, podcast. But one of the things before we finish up here, what is it that you want that my listeners to really hear you say or really hear coming from this and as a Native American that is here for this reason?
Mhm. I think understanding that being here in Cumberland County, being here in Carlisle, as an Indigenous person, we carry a lot of weight. The lift is heavy for those of us that are here and connected to the living histories of this community. And my encouragement, especially to our non-native relatives, listeners, is to do your own research. Sometimes because we are a very forward-facing entity, I'll get a lot of questions from the community, some that are ignorant, I'd say, some that are disrespectful, I'd say, but most of them are very genuine and very compassionate, inquiries. But there's some though that want me to do the research for them, and I'm not here to do that. Like, I'm here to help guide, in the learning process for sure, but I'm not here to do research for people. So I encourage our non-native relatives to do your research, like, look at Cumberland County Historical Society. Go there if you're here locally. Go to the Carlisle Barracks. You can go there, go through their clearance form. You have to go through a clearance form to get onto the base,
Yeah.
because it's an active Army base. But you can go to the Army Heritage Center, that's also another resource. And then also reading your book or your own books. Like, we have a podcast episode with Dr. John Truden, and he gives a recommendation of 20 books to look at. So doing your own research is really important. But I think that, when you engage with our Native people, especially our non-Native relatives, I think just recognizing that we have very complex histories, but we bring a lot of joy and celebration. We're pretty badass fun people. So
Yeah, and the other thing is, if a teacher would be listening to this, would you go to the K through 12 or wherever and talk with kids? Because Pennsylvania, as you know, we
Mhm,
had no reservation or
mhm,
that they could learn firsthand.
mhm. Yeah, with our young learners here, it was so cute. There was 2 students that came from, Newville. They were 7th graders, and I was blown away by their interest in interviewing different people for a project or a competition they were submitting, like a short documentary, and they're 7th graders, and they came here and interviewed me, and I was just amazed at the eagerness to learn.
Oh,
And so for our young learners, and I can't remember which place they scored when they submitted their video about the Carlisle Indian School, because I'm just amazed at the learners here in our community in Cumberland and engaging with them and not underestimating what they're capable of learning or wanting to learn. Like it's just remarkable to me. Like, for example, like, always use the land as a teaching tool, teaching mechanism. Like, the Carlisle Indian School is connected to Gettysburg. Look, go to the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center and put in there Gettysburg. You'll see pictures of our Indian people who went to Devil's Den, right?
oh,
And so with our young learners, take them to these places and show them this is our Native people came here. What does that mean now, right? Like, it was by way of promoting post-Civil War tourism. And
oh,
so using the land as a way to teach is extremely powerful here in Cumberland County.
yeah,
Yeah, I think in closing, I think I'm so thankful to have this space to be able to engage and to share and dialogue. And I think as we are learning together, acknowledging that our Native people are so diverse. There's actually 575 federally recognized tribes. And so knowing that we have our own unique languages, cultural regalia, how we look,
yeah.
political viewpoints, different casinos, like, we're
Oh,
so diverse,
yeah, yes.
and so I think that's important as we to just leave with the audience as we navigate this place together.
Sounds great. So, contact information or where can they find you or
Yeah, so email our center at it's cfnp@dickinson.edu. You can connect with us on social media. We're on Instagram at CFNP Dickinson. And then also to connect with me on social media is at DRCHEROMIAH at Dr. Cheromiah.
thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and the wonderful news about the Jim Thorpe Center for the Futures of Native People. It has been a very long time in coming.
Mhm.
Sincerely true. Thank you to the listeners for tuning in and for your interest in Dr. Mandy's story and the Jim Thorpe Center. Please reach out to her and with any of your questions, and she'll be happy to answer them. And as always, please hit the follow, subscribe button so you don't miss a conversation. Share the story, and please write a review and let me know what you think about the conversation. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and take care.